Hello and welcome back to the Final Lap podcast. My name is Josh. I'm joined as always by Sam, and that's it for the 2025 season 24 Grand Prix weekend completed, and we have a new champion on our hands. First off, before we get into everything from a pretty exciting weekend in Abu Dhabi, how are you doing, Sam? How did you enjoy our last bit of Grand Prix racing for the 2025 season this weekend?
I'm doing all right. I did enjoy it. We got to watch together. It was a great time. There's a lot of a lot of firsts in that race, a lot to catch up on. So I'm excited to get into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of the end of an era in a lot of ways. But we'll get into a little bit of that later. First off, though, Lando Norris is your new champion in 2025. He wins his first world championship by 2 points over Max Verstappen and 13 points over Oscar Piastri with his P3 podium finish in Abu Dhabi. Coming into the weekend, that's all he needed was a podium, and it didn't matter what anybody else did. He would be a world champion. Got that last spot on the podium, barely squeaked in there, but he got what he needed, and now he's a one-time world champion. He adds to the list. Now there's 35 different people who have drivers who have won an F1 world championship, and he is the newest addition to that list. We'll get into kind of more of Lando's season overall as a new champion. But what did you think more specifically about his race this weekend with that podium?
Yeah, I mean, I got to give Lando a lot of credit. He did everything he needed to do. It certainly wasn't the most flashy title win, coming in P3, not the most eventful race of the season, but he did everything he had to do, put himself in the right position, played it safe all weekend. The pass on Sonoda was a little aggressive, but did what he had to do, didn't, kept the car on track and brought it home safe in P3. So did exactly what he needed to. A great job to Lando, great job to the team, and what an effort to pull through, because there was a lot of times this year, even though they had the fastest car for a good portion of the season, there was a lot of times where it felt like Lando was out of it, where his back was against the wall, and they still found a way through and still managed to come through with this title. So credit to Lando, did exactly what he needed to today and throughout the course of the season to become a world champion.
Yeah, and I think kind of his drive on Sunday just kind of summed up his whole season of doing exactly what you need to do. He did have his excellent moments where he looked very, very good, but it was the consistency at the end of the day that won him this championship. You had stretches of the season where Red Bull just wasn't giving Max a car capable of putting him up near the front where he needed to be. That's a big reason of why he lost this championship. And then Oscar had a big stretch as well where he just wasn't performing up to his standard. Meanwhile, Lando, yeah, he did have those stretches, especially at the beginning of the season, where it didn't seem like he was on it perfectly with the car, but his bad days seemed to be better than what Oscar had in the middle of the season, and then towards the end of the season, and then when Max in the middle of the season. I wouldn't put those on Max. That was more of just a bad car. But the point is he was, maximizing his opportunities. I guess he didn't really raise. He raised his floor, I think, a lot this year. And that was kind of what you saw in this race of not putting himself in jeopardy to lose big points. There were a couple times where it looked like things might get a little bit squirrely. The pass on Yuki, that incident, trying to do some double overtakes down the straight on the Racing Bulls and the Aston Martin there. There were some opportunities where things could go wrong, but he didn't allow for that to happen. And really, since Canada, that's been the case. But in this race in particular, he really portrayed that very well. And I think if they were trying to just get full points this weekend, they probably could have snagged P2 back from Oscar. I don't think he fought it very hard on lap one, just wanting to keep it on track, not mix it up with your teammate too much, where Oscar didn't really have much to lose there and Lando had a ton. And then as well, just throughout the race, I don't think they stopped twice to cover off Leclerc. I think they were really just racing for P3, and just trying to secure what they needed to do, and they did exactly that. Him and the team as well.
Yeah, they did. I mean, it certainly felt like he was under pressure a little bit from Leclerc at the beginning, but he managed to
Yeah.
hold him off. And, uh, I think even if Leclerc had gotten past there momentarily, I think Lando would have found his way back around before the end
Mm-hmm.
of the race. But yeah, he was kind of in a position where, with the pace McLaren had, I don't want to say it was easy because it certainly wasn't in the moment. That's an extremely high pressure, difficult situation, especially at the start. You don't want to mess up that start. But once you get out there in P3, once you can kind of set your own pace, really there's nobody that should be able to catch you behind. Nobody, the Ferrari didn't have quite the pace despite Leclerc's best efforts. Mercedes, I thought would have a little more pace, but Russell had a couple mistakes this weekend that
Mm-hmm.
set him back a little bit. So it certainly was a difficult drive from a nerve standpoint. It was not easy to get that home, and with millions of people watching, whole, uh, I think what did Brundle say at one point? His whole life on the line, basically.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, in that
when Leclerc
situation.
was yeah, when Leclerc was, he said Leclerc has the chance to spoil his night, his year, and his whole life if he if he made that overtake and got past and it took that podium from him.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I'm saying. It was one of those drives where if he could get out clean, get out safe, even with Oscar passing him, there was a good chance of bringing it home in P3. And credit to him, he did
Mm-hmm.
exactly that, did what he needed to do, and now he's the champion. So yeah, fair play to him and McLaren.
Yeah, they definitely played it safe. I think on Sunday, and that's kind of, you know, you could say that that might be an issue and that can create some problems. And sometimes you see uh, what you see in football, you see teams go into prevent defense, and they usually say that prevents you from winning. And there's certainly that aspect of when you try and just get the minimum amount of points you need. Sometimes you don't maximize things all the way. And that was kind of how I felt a little bit with how McLaren and Lando were treating this weekend, but it worked out for them. And I wouldn't say Lando was, like that when he was driving on track. I think the only time he was like that was with the Piastri overtake. But he was very aggressive and assertive with the Yuki overtake, with the overtakes, going through that pack of cars that he was, pit into as well. Um, and that closing stretch, they kind of had to tell him to slow down a little bit at the end because he was still pushing pretty hard, trying to catch up to Oscar there, and maybe take P2 away. So he was conservative where he needed to be, but he was also aggressive when he needed to be as well. And I think that's in this drive this weekend and in the season as a whole, I think that's where Lando's really really grown as a driver this year.
Yeah, I think that's been a massive difference throughout this championship. Is we've seen Lando's growth throughout the year. We saw him make mistakes earlier in the year. It's tough to say this after the last couple races because this race he loses a place to Piastri. He's also had one or two other bad starts recently, but overall, the start problem's gotten a lot better. Managing his pace at the start of races, staying in front when he's on pole, and then yeah, learning from his mistakes. It's been a real battle, real test of nerves, a test of endurance throughout the season, and he's been able to hold up even when there were times where we doubted him. So I think that's been a characteristic of this championship has been Lando's growth versus Oscar. He looked better these last two races, but he looked so good most of the season, and then he couldn't pull himself out of that slump there for a couple months, and that's kind of what cost him in the end. So I think that's sort of the story is Lando getting better as the season goes on, and Oscar, despite his best efforts at the end, kind of losing it down the stretch a little bit. Uh, so I think that's something to keep an eye on for the future as well. Will Lando continue to grow? Will Oscar turn around next year? I think that'll be interesting to see. But as far as the McLaren team dynamic in the championship, I think that's kind of what this is going to be remembered by is Lando's growth as a driver and turning himself into a champion in a season where we certainly had my doubts. I think I picked him at the start of the season, and I still had my doubts that
Yeah.
he could do it. So, uh, yeah, and he found a way. He persevered and managed his way through some tough times, learned from him, and got better as the season went on.
Yeah, so do you think that's kind of been what's changed for Lando is just raising that floor? Like what do you think has been the difference for Lando that got him over the edge this year compared to last year when he was in his first actual title fight? Do you think it was his just raising his floor, uh his ability to just minimize the big mistakes that were under his control? Or do you think it was something else that he changed either during this season or in the off season that got him over the edge compared to last season?
Yeah, I would say it's overall just growth as a driver. I mean, before this year, he'd never finished in the top five in a drivers' championship, or before last year, I should say. And last year was a real test for him, where he had his opportunities to maybe catch Max and couldn't
Mhm.
put it together in that last stretch of races until Abu Dhabi when it was too late. Whereas this year, he starts slow and he can turn it around later in the season. Mexico City, Sao Paulo, uh, a couple wins there, and then doing what he needed to down the stretch, despite the McLaren's best efforts at times, despite the Vegas DQ and his own Canada incident earlier in the year, the DNF at the Dutch Grand Prix. Despite all those things, he came back from all of them stronger and learned from them when he could and took advantage of the moment when it came. So I think that's the what we're going to kind of look back on here and what's the difference between this season and last season is just Lando's growth as a driver and him sort of buckling down after Canada. He talked about getting a lot of distractions out of his life, just keep staying off social media and all those kinds of things, and just putting the race first. This week McLaren limited the media obligations for both guys, so I think that's just the kind of thing that has gotten him over the hump. Is just I don't want to say more focused because I'm sure he was very focused before, but just this extra level that you have to be at to be a champion, and Lando found it this year. So I think that's the difference between this year and not only last year, but all the other times before that, going back to losing in Sochi a few years ago and everything we've seen from Lando since then.
Yeah, I think it's that growth, like you mentioned, but to me, it's a big focus on his mental growth. I think is what got him over the edge this year. I think starting the season, he didn't quite take that leap that I was expecting him to in the offseason after the last year's battle with Verstappen. But then I think the Canada incident is where things really, really changed for him. After that crash, he was 9-4 head to head against Oscar in Grand Prix races. The rest of the season doesn't include sprints. And then he had 5 wins in that time period as well. You could say he was 10-4 if you include Vegas, but since they were both disqualified, I'm not going to include that. So I just think that after that, something changed where, and this kind of goes back to him not necessarily playing it safe, but picking his moments and choosing his points to attack and when to be conservative. I think that's what he really got from that Canada incident. And there are other things too this year that I think would have broke him in years past. Say the Dutch Grand Prix, where he retired due to engine failure, placed him a lot of points behind Oscar there. I'm not sure he comes back from that, last season or 2 or 3 seasons ago. If he's in the same position, I think that might have been too much to handle. You look at Vegas as well, where that really hurt him because he was extending his championship lead and pretty much was going to be able to put it away, or essentially put it away in Qatar with an extra weekend to spare. Then the DQ happens, and now he's just kind of holding on from there. And I don't think he would have handled that as well in years past, but he just kind of let those things, he just took them and let them kind of go off his shoulder, and he just used it as a way to motivate himself instead of getting down on it and worrying about, oh man, I lost all these points because of this or because of this. He just said, no, I just got to go out next weekend and maximize my opportunities, and then eventually those points will add up, and that's exactly what happened. He did get help from Oscar. He got I wouldn't say he got help from Max, because Max was storming in those closing races, but he got help from him in Red Bull in the middle of the season. So I think that it's mostly a Lando thing here, and I'm proud of Lando for how he handled the season, because things could have gone wrong many times, and he was able to just take those hits, move on, and really learn it and grow from every one of those. And that's what you see out of champions in a championship kind of mentality that we didn't see last year.
Yeah, and I think an interesting dynamic with this championship is the difference in levels of pressure between Lando and Oscar and Max on the other side. Lando and Oscar both have so much to prove. This was Oscar's first chance at a title, Lando's second chance. Even if last year was a little bit more of an outside chance, it's still his second time in the spotlight there. And both these guys had something big to prove, a big mark on their resume. Again, this was talked about numerous times throughout the week, but who knows with these new regs what everything's going to look like. There's a world where these guys, it's their only title chance, and neither of them have won one yet. So it's massive pressure every week in, week out, versus Max, who not only has 4 titles, but is coming back from a 100-point deficit in the championship. So that's as much of a free roll as you're ever going to get. Like, you go for it, you lay it out on the line, and even if you don't get there, you gave it a heck of a run. And, Max's stock doesn't fall at all from not winning this title. Even if the season had played out differently and they were more neck and neck throughout the year, Max's stock would not have fallen, given where Red Bull's at as a team and some of the performances we saw from him this year. He was incredible this season. But Lando and Oscar, this is a massive moment for both of them and their stocks and the rest of their career, how they're remembered. This might be their biggest moment in F1, both of them. I hope it isn't. I think they both got a lot to prove. I think Oscar's still got a great chance to win a title. I think Lando could win another one, potentially, depending on how McLaren looks in this next era and what the future looks like. But for me, that I think made a big difference in the way this played out, and in Max's ability to come back, but also showcases Lando's growth mentally and his ability to buckle down when the moment calls for it and get the job done.
Yeah, and that's a great point. You look at what what was at stake here for Lando and Oscar. The first world championship. You're have the most to prove of the 3 championship contenders. The McLaren guys had way more to prove than Max did, who was essentially out of the championship by the grace of his great driving and some big mistakes by McLaren. Somehow it is in it at the end. And he didn't really have anything to lose on Sunday. For the last 4, 5, 6 weekends, he's had nothing to lose, just going all out, all for it. And you kind of saw that with Max's mentality as well. He was just super chill about everything these last few race weekends, where he's like, yeah, it's going to be great if I can, but The McLarens, they're so far ahead. It's still, really unlikely, but we'll give it a go. And um, it was, seeing him afterwards, he seemed perfectly fine with how things ended, which is really weird because you go back to 2021 and obviously that was probably more heated battle for the championship than this was for Max. Um, but if he lost that championship, he would not have had this kind of response. Granted, I think a lot of that has to do with A, he's already won 4 of them, and B, I think that's part of growing as well as a driver that we've seen from Max this year. So, that's a great point looking at the difference in mentality between those guys as well. When you get to the level that Max is at, you just have a lot less to lose, a lot less to prove, and that helps you as well when you get down to the end, and you don't really have as much pressure because you've already shown what you can do, and there's nothing left to prove to the public that you haven't already shown.
Yeah, and I think Max clearly throughout his career, or lately, compared to earlier in his career, has shown a great ability to be, just a great competitor on track, but
Mm-hmm.
sort of separate the moment the checkered flag waves. He can kind of cool down and see things from a broader perspective. And
Except for Ocon in Brazil.
yeah. Yeah, well, that was a little while ago, I guess.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah,
yeah,
that's what I'm saying is lately, I think that's an area where he's really
yeah.
grown, and it's easy to do, I guess, on some level when you've already won 4 championships. But
Mm-hmm.
he can sort of look at it now and say, like for example, this weekend, he was nonstop battling on track, and then the moment the checkered flag waves, he's reassuring the rest of the team over the radio, saying it's all right, we did everything we
Yeah.
could, great
Mm-hmm.
job, everyone. And I think that's an area to go back to Lando, where it seems like he's grown as well. He's known as one of the nice guys, or at least one of the more
Mm-hmm.
relaxed guys on the grid. Like not as much known as a competitor as a Verstappen or an Alonso or someone like that.
Mm-hmm.
But he's shown the ability, for lack of a better phrase, to lock in when that time comes, and then
Mm-hmm.
off track after the race, he's enjoying life. So, uh, yeah, I think that's an area where both those drivers have grown over the years, and now they're in the prime of their careers respectively, and they're you can see they're really at their peak, both physically on track, but also with their mental headspace as well when it comes to F1.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. It was like, where did that mental stability come from for Verstappen? I think a lot of it has to do actually this year, talking about growth for Lando this year. I think what happened with Max in Barcelona with George Russell, I think he's had a different temperament since then. He realized that I think that really made him realize that sometimes if you let things get to you too much on track, it can cost you huge in terms of points, in terms, it hurts you, it hurts your team. You kind of let a lot of people down in that aspect. And I think that that's an area where Max has grown a lot this year, is being able to, he's still the most intense competitor on the grid, in my opinion, right now. But he is able to separate that once he gets off the track. And he's also able to, you know, he's able to separate it when he gets off the track, but he's also just got a different perspective about where he is at as a driver. Especially with this championship being so far back, he knows that it was super unlikely to begin with. So I think that just the way that this championship unfolded, along with the George Russell incident, and then there's other things in his life as well. Like he and his fiance, I think they're engaged now or having a child soon, or they already have. I'm blanking on if they already had the baby or not. But it's just so he's had a lot of changes in his life as well that are, I think play into that aspect and that mentality as well. along with the stuff that's happened on track this year.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's another lesson that him and really the rest of the grid is going to take from this year going back to Spain is don't take anything for granted. Any little
Yeah.
moment can make the difference in a title fight, and obviously there's from all three sides when you combine it, there's well over a dozen moments that you could point to and say that decided the championship. So it's not solely just based on that, but that moment in Spain costing Max. He went from fifth to 10th because of that 10-second penalty,
Mm-hmm.
and those points obviously would have gotten him over the hump for the title. That's not something he could have possibly imagined at that point with the way McLaren was dominating in the state of Red Bull. But and that's something that everyone learns in sports, and it's
Mm-hmm.
something you always kind of think, oh yeah, obviously everything's always important, but in reality, it doesn't always play out that way. And now he's going to look back on that, maybe with some extra regret. But yeah, I think that's something to remember going forward is week to week. These guys. They might make mistakes. There might be the team might make mistakes, but you're never really out of it until the very end, until you're really mathematically out. And uh, yeah, every race matters, every point matters. Some of these teams fighting for P7 or P5, that's their big fight of the season. Every point matters to them too. So I think that's what makes F1 so interesting to follow for a whole year is that every point matters, every race matters, and sometimes it could come down to inches or miles, whatever it is. Everything matters in F1.
Yeah, that Max penalty in Barcelona kind of feels like it's like if you're down 30 in a football game and you have like a late hit unsportsmanlike conduct penalty, and you think, oh, you're just so upset because the way the game's going, and you take that out, you get a big penalty, you give up another touchdown there, you're down whatever 35, and then your team makes a huge comeback, but you come up one touchdown short, and it's like, well, maybe that might have changed things if you didn't do that. In that moment, you never possibly think that what you did is going to affect the outcome of the game because you just feel like it's all lost at that point. You're down by so much, but sometimes those things do end up mattering, and that's kind of what we saw this season with Max in that Barcelona incident. To where, I mean, yes, I do. I blame him for that because, he should know better as a 4-time champion, as a guy who's been on the grid for as long as he has. You just don't really, you don't do those kind of things. A, because you're not supposed to drive into somebody else on purpose on track. But B, it can end up costing you in the end, big time, you and your team. And that's the thing that I think he's really going to take from this season is to not take anything for granted. Like you said, no matter what the position is, because you just never know what's going to happen the rest of the season.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I said, it can be a game of inches, and I think that's a great analogy with the football game. Even when you think you're down and out, even when you think you got nothing left in the tank, there's still something left to fight for, and it's it. I definitely don't blame him any less for that incident. Now, I still think it was a big mistake,
Mm-hmm.
and I still think it was his fault and within his control, and really disappointing uh, driving like that because I really like Max, and it's just not sportsmanlike in any way, and unsafe even at a lower speed, but. Regardless, I think from a championship standpoint, those are the moments you're going to look back on as a driver because they are in your control. Just like if Lando had lost, it would be Canada. If Oscar,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Oscar did lose, I'm sure he's looking back to Baku and a couple other weekends as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean that's just the way it is, and it equaled out this year with Lando on top, and he deserves it. He came through at the right time and did everything he needed to do.
Yeah, that is the one part about the Max thing that he was asked after the race this weekend. looking back at the incident in Barcelona, if he feels like that cost him. And he said that, there were so many other points this season that, you could look at. Why are you singling out that one? uh I mean, to me, I get it. I get why you're singling out that one, because that's one that was fully in his control. That, those were points that were lost that he could have easily not lost had he just, kept his cool in that situation. Um, so I get, where the guy asking that question's coming from. And I feel like that's one area where I feel like, I'm sure he's upset and he knows that what he did there was wrong and ultimately cost him. But you also gotta kind of own up for that, and realize that yeah, that probably did end up costing you the championship. There are other points, to his point, in the season where you lost out on points just in car development, on other mistakes throughout the season. But that's one that's fully in your control, that you could have easily avoided. You could have not done that, and he did, and that ultimately costs him big time in the end. Let's move to that Lando and Yuki incident, where Lando is trying to get past Yuki. Yuki's trying to hold him up, play the team game, kind of be Sergio Perez in 2021 kind of thing. And he's just weaving all over the back straight, trying to block Lando, trying to break the toe, whatever. And Lando has to go a little bit off track to make the pass down the straight. Yuki gets a penalty there for weaving on the straight, driving dangerously, and Lando does not receive a penalty, even though he overtook off the racetrack. Do you think Lando should have received a penalty for that moment with Yuki? And do you think that would have ultimately changed the championship outcome in any real way?
I don't think it would have, just because I think Lando would have made a back past Leclerc eventually. I mean, it certainly would have made it harder and would have made it a lot more intriguing. That being said, I don't think he deserves a penalty simply because of Yuki's movements ahead.
Mm-hmm.
With the double swerve, something that's illegal. I know that us, we grew up watching a lot of NASCAR. This is the kind of thing that I'm sure to us just feels like hard nosed racing, but uh, you know, open wheel going 200 miles an hour,
Yeah.
it's a little bit different. So I think for me, I don't see a penalty for Lando there, just given the circumstances of Yuki swerving there and running him down effectively off the track. Uh, I think it's a little bit harsh on Lando there. I certainly think, there's another world where Yuki does continue to commit that way, or Lando comes a little bit up the track and there's an accident, and
Mm-hmm.
Lando it loses out on the world championship, and we're sitting here saying something different. Maybe we're saying Lando should have backed out there and waited for another chance to pass Yuki,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a fair criticism. But I think for me, I wouldn't have a penalty there simply because of Yuki's movements ahead, and yeah, there was a lot of space on the track there on the other side, but once uh, once Lando got on side of him like that, there's pretty much no way that he could pull back around. He'd have to, really back off and loop it all the way back around. It's not
Mm-hmm.
really reasonable to see that in that moment. So for me, I would say no penalty for Lando.
Yeah, I agree. Have to start calling Yuki Leangelo Ball the way he was swerving down that straight. But I do think it was, I think it has to be on Yuki here, because you can't give both of them a penalty. I think for that instance, and once they gave Yuki a penalty, I don't think you can really give Lando one as well, because you're kind of you're really putting the onus on Yuki there, to say that is your fault once you hand him that penalty. And then it's really just, Lando just reacting to that ultimately. Um, so yeah, I don't think you can really give both of them a penalty. I think Yuki probably deserved it more than Lando would have. Also, it's not like Lando, just completely ran through a corner, just shortcut a corner and then just kept up the road ahead. It was on a straight. He really, I mean, the advantage there is, is minimal. And I know you could say the advantage is he got the pass done. That's true. But he was kind of forced there to begin with. If he doesn't, take evasive action and get left there, he's going to crash out of the race and ultimately cost the championship. So you could say, that Lando deserved a penalty there. And he did overtake off track. I mean, that is, but you have to look at the entirety of the situation that Lando was put in. And once you put that into context, I think there's no real way you can hand Lando a penalty there, because it was ultimately a situation that he didn't really create. He was forced into that. And yes, he was the benefiter of it, but he was, he didn't want to overtake off track. It's not like he wanted to try and skip through the grass there to make that move. That's probably the last thing he wanted to do. So it was not, intentional cutting the track to make the pass. It was where he was forced into, and I think ultimately at the end of the day, that's where you got to leave it. And I think everything was assessed rightfully there. I do think it's interesting that Red Bull didn't even really try and fight it. But yeah, I think in the Horner days that would have been, he'd probably still be talking about it today, to be honest. But it's different times at Red Bull, and I think that it was all up to snuff there for the way that those penalties were assessed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's really worth Red Bull coming back and trying to get that penalty removed or anything. There's not much on the line for them at this point. It's pretty tough to argue against it as well. It's a pretty slam dunk penalty when you look at the rules. He was weaving all up and down the straight. So, yeah, I can't imagine that they'd be able to get that one undone. But I think for me, it just I don't really see a way where Yuki isn't penalized there. And I've if it was a little less blatant, I could maybe see Lando has to I guess give up the position since Yuki was on the lead lap. And they have to do it again, sort of. But with how blatant and how I guess reckless, for lack of a better term, Yuki's driving was, I think it was the right call to allow Lando the position, just given that he did make the pass, and even if it was technically an off-track pass, which it was, I don't think there's anything more he could have done to try and prevent it.
Yeah, Brundle I tell you what, he was great the whole race. He was on a special heater kind of in that final, but he was just absolutely disgusted with Yuki and that movement, that weaving down the straight. I mean, he was losing his mind. And then he was also upset with Yuki and Red Bull as well when they were talking about Leclerc being a certain amount behind and trying to maybe make that work and hold up, kind of the whole group and just make it to where it's really tough for Lando. Brundle was not having it with Yuki and that side of the Red Bull garage.
Now, I gotta say, I've really liked Crofty usually. I didn't think it was his best race. The
I agree.
World Championship call at the end was kind of fumbled, even though in his defense, they kept the camera on Max way more than Lando on that last lap, which probably made it harder and was a little surprising to me. But
yeah, well, that TV direction and in that final race, I felt like they had gotten a lot better as the year went on. I feel like it took a huge step back in that last race. Yeah, Max is going to win the race, but you got to stay on the championship winner on that whole last lap and build up to that call. That is where I feel like Crofty, I don't think he was great throughout the whole race, but I feel like he was put in a bad position there at the end to try and squeeze in that call when Lando had essentially already crossed the line. But yeah, the TV direction was not good there, especially at the end.
yeah, I was waiting for sort of that moment, like when Leclerc won Monaco. We followed him for the whole last
Yeah,
lap. I
yeah,
think on the F1 TV and the international broadcasts, they followed him for the whole last lap, and we
yeah.
got the whole narration and everything. I expected that for Lando, and we didn't get it,
Mhm.
at least on the international broadcast. But anyways, I say that to say Brundle was fantastic. all race. Every Yuki incident he thought was a war crime, and uh, it was just he was really on one with all of his drag reduction system, saying that for the last time and everything. I'm gonna miss some of the Brundleisms just of this era. I'm sure he'll have more
Yeah.
new ones next year with with the new system and everything. But uh, yeah, Brundle made up for it. He was fantastic.
Yeah, he was in peak form there this weekend. It was excellent stuff from Brundle. There were some times where it got a little outrageous, but that's what I mean, he's a color commentator. That's kind of what you want is some a few outrageous things here and there. And I just, it was great. And yeah, Crofty, on the other hand, you're right. It wasn't his best race overall, but at the end, I don't really fault him for that at the end because you kind of got to show who's on camera and, he wasn't really put in a good position there. And then for the TV crew as well to go from Max for that whole last lap, then Max crosses the line. They cut to Oscar instead of Lando, giving him a few extra seconds there to build that up and set that up. No, they cut to Oscar instead, and then they cut to Lando. It was not. It was probably some of F1, not F1 TV, the company, but F1 TV in general, like the F1 TV as a whole, like they're some of their worst work, broadcasting that final lap.
Yeah, it was just surprising because usually we get, like I just mentioned, Leclerc and Monaco,
Yeah.
Lewis when he won Silverstone
Hmm.
last year got kind of a similar thing, and when we have these big moments in F1, when someone wins a championship for the first time, for example, you usually have that moment to celebrate it, and we didn't get that. But yeah, I agree. Even though I didn't love the call, he wasn't put in a great spot, and the TV direction is something I hope they focus on, at Sky and with the international broadcast in the off season, because I do really like the commentators over there and really enjoy watching their feed. It's just yeah, the direction can be a little misguided sometimes.
Yeah, they just lost the plot at the end. I mean, that's what it is. It's a shame, but they just lost the plot, and tough for Lando and tough for the fans to not really get that full last lap experience. Let's switch over to Oscar now. Um, where did things go wrong for Oscar this year? He had such a big lead on Max and Lando. Uh, Ultimately finishes behind Max as well in the championship. So doesn't even secure P2. I feel like if this was anybody else, I feel like we'd be talking about it as a huge collapse. Uh, and instead, I feel like no one's really talking about it that way. Um, and I give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt too, because it's his first time in championship contention. Uh, it's going to be hard to do that going up against Max Verstappen and your teammate who's got a few years of experience on you as well. But I just kind of curious what you think went wrong for Oscar this year that really switched where he was doing so great the first half of the season and then things just really fell apart for him at the end until kind of those final two races.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons why it hasn't been approached as uh, a big, a choke for
Hmm.
I essentially, I think part of it is just the attention's been spread a few different ways. I think with so much attention on the Max comeback, there hasn't been as much talk of Oscar just sort of throwing this away and
Yeah.
losing out on this championship. Uh, I think too it's a little bit tough, even though I think certainly the mental pressures seem to catch up to him a little bit. It's a little bit tougher to make that argument when he finished strong in the last two races. He finished on the podium in Qatar and really should have won that race if the strategy was better. And then wins as well in or comes a second as well in Abu Dhabi, finishes on the podium. It's tough to uh, come out and say, oh, he's totally choked it away and mentality's not there when he finishes the season so strong. So I think that's a big part of it. And then I think too, like you said, being such a young driver, being in his first title fight, I think there's some grace given there. Maybe if he had a bigger lead even than he did, maybe if he had a massive lead and had lost out to someone like Max, maybe there would be, a sort of a bigger,
Hmm.
this idea of him throwing it away would be more in the zeitgeist. But right now, I think it's just, everybody likes Oscar. He seems to be pretty well liked among the fan base and everything. And I think there's, people just aren't piling on him right now because their
Hmm.
attention spread in so many different directions with this three-way
Yeah.
title fight. And, he did give it a good run, even though his form certainly tailed off a little bit post Baku. He still, after Baku, he was in the top five every race other than the Vegas DQ. So, he still gave it a good run. Uh, just, yeah, a lot of factors going into that to why I think in the moment we're not thinking of it as some disaster for him or some a terrible moment like it may have been perceived, with some other drivers or at some other times.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the way that the papaya rules situation is perceived by the public as well, and just the way that that has uh, gotten the broader attention of the public of kind of taking more of the sympathy for Oscar's side to where a lot of people feel like McLaren just haven't prioritized him in the right way. And then the other part too is I think the Max comeback is huge, and just talking about that more, and that's a great point as well. That him not losing the championship to Max, 1-2, he did lose ultimately in the standings to Max, but Max isn't the one who took the championship from him. Lando was, so you don't have necessarily that, oh, he blew a 104-point lead kind of headline that you would probably see if it was the other way around. Um, so yeah, I think that there's a few reasons for it. As for what went wrong, I just think that it was his first real attempt at a championship. We saw last year with Lando a very similar thing, to where it just didn't seem like he was maximizing every weekend and getting the best out of the car when it really mattered. I guess the only terrible weekend he had was Baku. Um, but that along with these tracks at the end of the year, barring these last two, just not really being good historically for Oscar in his first two seasons and this year as well. I don't think that helped as helped him out. And then just seeing Max kind of charging through the field, I think probably spooked him a little bit as well in his first championship fight. Seeing a four-time champion just slowly eating away at your lead like that, and then your teammate is as well. It's a lot to handle. Um, and you could be critical of Oscar for that, and there's certainly uh, some reasons to be, but he's also it's his first time. You got to give him a little bit of leeway, I think, like I did with Lando last year. Of you're going up against some really talented guys who have been there before. Uh, it takes a really special talent like we saw Max in 2021 in your first title fight to come out on top of that. And Max, almost didn't even come out on top of that one when he had a decent lead, uh, with a few races remaining as well. So, yeah, I just think it takes a kind of a special individual to do that. Not saying Oscar's not special, but I just think that's kind of a once in a generation kind of talent that it takes. And these other guys who are still great in their own right, it's really just more of a what you would expect from everybody in that situation to make some mistakes and grow and learn from it. Um, Whereas he might not be generational, but he's still great, and you got to take that into consideration. I think for why this year just didn't really go his way.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, there was some more grace shown to Lando last year, even though certainly a lot of criticism as well. And Lando was further into his F1 career than Oscar is at this point. Oscar is only in his third season in F1, so he's still sort of learning
Mm-hmm.
his way out there. Max's first title came, I believe, in his seventh season, and Lando's just did as well. It takes time. Sometimes these guys, I know
Hmm.
someone like Lewis Hamilton came in and competed for titles immediately, but it's not always going to be like that. And we
Yeah.
saw throughout the year that Oscar has the talent to be a champion if everything, if he can be a little more consistent throughout the whole 24 rounds instead of just the first two-thirds of it. So I think for me, I don't really. I certainly expected Oscar to win this championship for a while, and I think it's a little bit of a ding on his resume that he didn't. But I don't think that I don't suddenly think he's a bad driver or anything. I still think he's one of the better drivers out there, and I think if he gets good equipment again, I think he can compete with just about anybody up there at the top. So uh, going forward, I think there's a lot to learn from this for Oscar, and hopefully he gets a little bit of time away, time to rest and recoup after this title run, and then he'll come back stronger next year. And I think mentally, if he's in the right place, I think he will come back stronger
Hmm.
and ready to make a run at this title next year if McLaren is up there in the top two or three cars.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very similar to 2024 Lando to 2025 Lando for Oscar. I just think you learn from those moments in your first title fight and you apply it. And as long as he has the car next year, I think he'll be just as strong, if not stronger, next year as he was for the majority of this season. Um, so yeah, I just think that's part of the growth and part of the path that F1 champions usually take, or really good F1 drivers usually take. Moving to Max, what do you think Max can take from this season? Do you think he sees it as more of a lost opportunity, or one where it just didn't go his way? You could say, we already talked about the Barcelona incident. There were other opportunities as well throughout the season. There was the car development mid-year just wasn't there. Um, how do you think he's going to view this season looking back on it? It seems like we've talked about this a little bit already, but it seems like he's pretty content with how it ended, not being the champion, just with the deficit that he had. But I'm not sure exactly, because I know that competitive guy's, obviously still in there. I'm sure he's not happy about some points in the season that he lost out on and ultimately cost him this. So do you think he'll see it as a lost opportunity, a missed opportunity, or one that just needed a miraculous comeback and just didn't, just came up a little bit short?
Yeah, I think it's sort of an odd place, right? Because when you only lose by 2 points, you're always going to think of it's a missed opportunity. You're always going to think of
Mhm.
those moments like Spain and a couple others where Max missed out on points, and you think, oh, this could have been my year. I could have pulled off this great comeback and ended up winning this title. But I think for him, he's going to look at it as a year of learning, a year of a
Mhm.
lot of lessons learned. If you think about all the turmoil at Red Bull with Horner leaving midseason and all the changes that they've made in the team, and just looking at Max's season, the second half versus the first half, not that he was driving poorly in the first half of the year because he had a lot of great drives in a lesser car, but seeing everything how much this Red Bull team has progressed and how good he has looked as the second half of the season. I think this is just going to be a year of learning where he can kind of sit back and say, okay, maybe I could have won that, but we learned a lot and we're going to grow and now for 26, if they're able to get a competitive engine with this new Ford deal, I think he's going to have a lot of lessons that he can build on because it's tough to take lessons from years like 22 and 23, even most of 24 when they were just so dominant. If you're winning every weekend, life's going great. It's tough to take lessons and learn from that. Now you can kind of sit back and say, okay, here's some areas where we had our deficiencies, where we can improve as a team, and where Max can improve as a driver and come back even stronger for this next era of cars starting next year.
Yeah, it's kind of like I know between his first and second championship, Hamilton had a little bit of time, but then he rattles off a few championships and then loses to Rosberg, and then comes back stronger and kind of takes that and wins a few more. And now he's up to 7, and you see what that did for his career. So sometimes these champions, I think, have to be put in a situation where whether it's their fault or the rest of the team not performing to what they need, uh, whether it's their fault or not, they kind of need to take a loss and learn from that and regrow. Because like you said, out front all the time, not being challenged, you're not really learning anything. You're not getting better as a driver, as whatever. Max is an incredible driver already. There's not much more that he could get better at, but he's going to learn from things this season that didn't go his way, whether that's maybe being more and I can't speak to this because he seems like a really hard worker and he's always engaged with the team, but maybe being even more engaged with the team and talking about what needs to happen and what needs to change for the car, or obviously the mental incident we saw in Barcelona, just tidying up those small things, so that next time he's in a championship fight, which he will be unless the Ford engine just blows. I think that he'll have a lot more experience than he already has, and he'll be able to rely on that. It'd be a lot better. So he'll look at the season as a missed opportunity because there were places that he could have got it done ultimately in the end, losing by 2 points. But I think that the lessons and the things that he's going to learn from this season is ultimately going to be even more beneficial than maybe winning. I mean, obviously coming back, learning those things and winning this championship would have been huge, and he would have an extra championship to his belt. But I still think that there's a lot of positives to take from this year for Max that he can use going forward and could be huge for the rest of his career.
Yeah, exactly. And we see that in other sports all the time where teams have holes that don't get exposed for a while because they're winning, because they have a player that sort of, keeps those holes from being exposed, or
You're
they
talking
have,
to a Chiefs fan, buddy.
yeah,
You know
yeah, or they
exactly
have,
what's going on.
you know,
Yeah,
and then a player or coach leaves or there's an injury or something, and all of a sudden, everything sort of, you see the whole picture. And
hmm
I think that's sort of what happened here, even though there was no injuries or anything like that. The whole Horner situation, the first half of the season kind of exposed some holes and some uh, problems in that Red Bull team, and they were able to regroup and come back stronger. So I think that's going to be the legacy of this season for Max, is that he showed great fight. I think some of his best drives in his career were this season, and I
hmm
think, not to take away from Lando, but I think if you polled the fans, a large number of fans would still say he was the best driver on the season. So I don't think
yeah,
his stock has fallen, anything like that. I think if anything, it may have gone up just with the fight
hmm
that he's shown this season. But uh, yeah, I think that's really it for his legacy and for, uh, just him personally. I think this season, was a big moment to learn and to grow and become an even better driver than what we've already seen, which is one of the best of all time.
yeah. I think, for a lack of a better term, his aura grew this year exponentially. No, and he didn't even win the championship because to 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 even come back to where he had a chance in the final race, there's I think we've talked about this before, but I think it's pretty widely known there's nobody on the grid currently in their current form that could have made that comeback the way that he did. And just to even stay in it mentally long enough to give yourself a chance there at the end, he has to be commended for that. Obviously, some of his drives this year, some of his wins were absolutely incredible drives that I don't think anybody else could pull off on the grid. So he's got he's got a special set of skills. And even if he's not a champion this year, it's one of those things where the eye test, you could tell he's still the best driver on the grid. And that's not to take anything away from Lando or Oscar or whoever. There's a ton of great drivers out there, but um, not every time the best driver or best team or whatever wins a championship. Um, and yeah, that's just the name of the game. That doesn't mean that the eventual champion wasn't deserving. They still won the championship. They scored the most points. They did what they needed to do. They beat who they needed to beat. But I still think that there is a difference between Max and the rest of the grid, and I think that you see that with how the season ended and how he was able to come back. And he pretty much, you can't say in the last, since summer break really, that any of his weekends were terrible and were not up to the standard that he needed to make a comeback in the championship. So that's as big of a like as much respect as you could give to a driver for coming back like that.
Yeah, and I think I got to say this is going to be one of those seasons where when 5, 10, even more years from now, I'm sure people will look back and say, yeah, the championship seasons were great, but the real ones remember 2025 Max and
Yeah.
what he
Yeah.
did that year with a worse car.
Yeah.
Like for me, like one of the moments that was going to stick out for me out of anyone this season, I just remembering when Max took pole at Silverstone. That was the last weekend with Horner, and the car just
Hmm.
seemed like a total mess. Max was
Yeah.
complaining practice all weekend, and then they changed the setup, just go all out for qualifying, and he puts it on pole, and I blown away. I watched it and I couldn't believe it for a few minutes thereafter. I was just so shocked that he managed to pull it off, and then they end up P5 because the state of the car couldn't hold up. But it's just those kinds of moments to pull off in a season like this. Those are the kind of moments that you're going to remember years from now over a lot of the easy wins that Max had a few years ago. Those are the kind of moments that are going to stick with you, and we got a lot of those from Max this year, even if he didn't end up the champion.
Yeah, I think the Monza 22nd win stands out for me. The Suzuka win as well earlier in the season. There's a lot of big moments that stand out where he just, you could tell he lifted and separated from the rest of the field. Uh, and yeah, like you said, the real ones will remember the 2025 Max, where I mean, he had 8 wins. He had more wins than anybody this season in a car that for a good portion of it was not good. I know that the McLaren drivers are very close in skill level, and Max just doesn't really have a teammate that's there to take wins from him. So I know the McLaren guys kind of took some wins away from each other, but still, to come out with 8 wins, more than either McLaren driver this season, it's absolutely insane, and it can't be understated how good he truly is right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at post summer break, he won 6 out of 10 races and finished on the podium every single race. So,
Yeah, it's
that's the
insane.
level he's at when they get the car. Not even they don't even have to be the best car because they weren't a lot of those weekends. But when they get it to a position where the car can compete, he's gonna deliver. So, yeah, not to go too long on Max, given it's Lando's big day and he deserves it for what he did. But yeah, this was a special performance for Max, even though he came up short, both this weekend and throughout this whole title fight.
Yeah, well, you also go from 2023 where people were just begging for anyone but Max to win a race. I mean, even some Max fans were wanting some competition for Max. And now this year, so many of those same people were pulling so hard for him to come back and win this championship. I mean, I think that just kind of shows as well the respect that he has from people that even might not be, full-time fans of his, that just respect what he's doing and can see the greatness that's happening right in front of their eyes. And like you said, though, I mean, this is Lando's big day, but I just want to make sure to, we talk about Max as well, because you can't understate what he did this season and the comeback that he almost had to win the championship. Let's move to some, I guess, some things that we will not see again after the 2025 season is wrapped up. A little bit of post-mortem on some things that will not be in the F1 world anymore. DRS gone. The beautiful drag reduction system, our beautiful baby boy, will not be returning to the grid in 2026. No more DRS zones. No more Brundle drag reduction system moments. The 2022, 2025 regulation set gone. Obviously, moving to new regs in 2026. Renault engines no longer. They won't be supplying engines for Alpine anymore. They won't be supplying them for anybody. They're off the grid. They've been on for so long now. They've supplied championship winning engines. They've been championship winning team at times. Kind of sad to see them leave the sport, even though their engines just for the past however many years have just not been very good. They've been extremely down on power compared to the rest of the grid. Red Bull and Honda partnership gone. No more. Very powerful sponsor or partnership between the two organizations. Obviously, this run that Max has gone on, powered by Honda, switching over to Aston Martin. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. And then Red Bull obviously switching to Ford in a partnership for them as well. And then lastly, there's other ones as well, but Sauber no longer a part of the grid, fully Audi next season. And that'll be interesting to see as well. Sauber's been a part of the grid for a long time in a lot of different configurations, but no more for them. No more stake kick Sauber next year. Sadly, we won't get the bright neon green car anymore. We'll be stuck with Audi black and red and silver, and it's just some things that we won't see anymore. What are you gonna miss the most? Drag reduction system, this set of regulations. What are you thinking as the thing you're gonna miss not seeing the most next year at the start of 2026?
Oh, I know you as a Alpine observer are probably going to miss the Renault engines the most. I think that's something you'll be thinking about for a while.
Alpine
Our beautiful
observer.
Renault engine. I was going to say Alpine fan, but that's not really true.
I think
So
observer is the correct term. I
yeah,
observe.
a
I'm not
keen.
a fan. I'm not a fan. I don't hate. I observe. I state the facts. I call it like I see it, and I just have to. I have to be there. I have to let the people know. We have to hold Alpine accountable.
It's just calling balls and strikes. But
Yep,
uh,
exactly.
I, I don't know. I saw someone make a good point online that we just got nothing for a Sauber final race, even though they've been in F1 for decades in different forms. Like there
Yeah,
was nothing on the broadcast. I mean, they mentioned it, but no,
casually mentioned
like,
it. Yeah.
yeah, no package or anything. Um, I don't. I think Sauber is one of those where like I think in the grand scheme of things, I'm excited that Audi's coming in
Mm-hmm.
as a brand, and I'm excited to have them on the grid. But they'll always be, look back in a few years. I'm sure there'll be nostalgia for. I'll remember when Sauber was on the grid and Hulkenberg got the podium, and all the Swiss flags
Yeah.
were at the podium and everything.
Yeah.
Good times. So I'm definitely gonna miss some Sauber. And I'm also going to miss DRS, which seems to be pretty divided amongst the fan base, whether or not it's going to be missed. And I think to be truthful, I think it's going to be tough to tell for sure until we see these new regs and see what they really
Mm-hmm.
look like. But I still feel like DRS is going to be missed just because it made for a lot of interesting action over the years. And even though we ended up with things like DRS trains at times that were frustrating, still ended up with a lot of great passes and
Mm-hmm.
interesting moments that were possible because of DRS. So, I think that's going to be what I miss the most. Again, the regulation set too is kind of dependent on what we see next year. I don't think it's my favorite set of regs, but also next year is going to be such a big leap. There's a world where it's a disaster and we're all going to be wishing for this again. So hopefully not. Hopefully it's amazing, but kind of a TBD on that one.
For DRS, preferably I would prefer cars that didn't need DRS because I'd like to see the cars just good enough to where they can overtake on pure pace and pure racing, but it definitely, listen, if it was needed for a certain amount of time to help overtaking with certain regulation sets and make the racing more exciting at times, then I was all for it in certain aspects. But yeah, it's one of those ones I'm split on too, just personally, because like I said, I'd rather it just be pure racing, but at the same time, you want action too, and if that's going to help deliver it, then you got to kind of give some give and take there. But I know you were really keen on this one of the last use of DRS and the last DRS overtake. Not sure if you want to expound more on what happened there, but I think it's just worth noting for the history books how that all played out.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, of course, there's the whole lore of Jensen Button being the first person to use the DRS button
Mm-hmm.
back when it was first introduced, and we ended up with Kimi Antonelli being the last person to use the DRS button, who was, I believe, three or 4 years old when Jensen Button won his Formula One title. So uh, just crazy on the timelines there. But the more interesting one, I think, is the last DRS overtake being done by Lance Stroll. Beautiful overtake on the outside for position there. Ended up being for the last point there over Bortoleto. So
Huge.
fair play to Lance, getting the job done. Points were valuable for Aston Martin this weekend, even though it wasn't enough to get them over the hump with Racing Bulls. Still, uh, yeah, always cool to see Lance get a big milestone moment.
He's gonna put his name in the history books with that one for sure. It'll be on the in a F1 history book somewhere when someone writes about the history of F1. It'll be added a little note with an asterisk. Lance Stroll, last person to use DRS to overtake. No one will ever forget that moment in Abu Dhabi when the rest of the grid is celebrating championships or crying in defeat. Lance was still out there putting it to work, getting things done, taking that last point spot over Bortoleto. Has to be commended for that, obviously.
I I've got to apologize. Actually, the overtake was on Behrman, but Behrman got a five
Oh my
second
gosh!
penalty. Uh,
So it didn't
Behrman got
matter.
Yeah, Behrman got a 5 second penalty, so it didn't matter. But yeah, so Behrman moved down down the pecking order there, all the way down to 12th. But uh, yeah, no, it was great
Yeah.
stuff from Lance. Beautiful pass around the outside.
Well, regardless, Lance, proud of you, buddy. Proud of what you were able to accomplish with that last use of TRS. We'll never forget that moment in Abu Dhabi in 2025. I'm sure that's what we were all thinking going into the weekend. That's the moment we were all thinking we'd never forget. Uh, let's move to our personal podiums now. After that little eulogy for those guys, for the ones we lost in 2025. Uh, my first up on my personal podium, I think has to be Lando, just because he secured the championship this weekend. Uh, you could make the case there were some better drives out there, but he did exactly what was needed of him in that moment and secured championship, his first championship. A lot of things could have gone wrong throughout that race, but didn't for him. And yeah, I mean, we've already talked about Lando so much, so there's not really much else to add. But P1 for Lando in my personal podium.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and do my one and two together because I had Lando two and Max one, but I think there's an argument, obviously,
All
for
right.
both. I only have Max ahead because really at the end of the day, both drivers did everything that they needed to win the championship, so they
That's
both
fair.
have a great
Yeah.
argument for P1, and I just
Yeah.
have Max ahead because he won the race.
Yeah.
But I think
That's fair.
I think it's totally valid to have Lando one as well, given that all the pressure he had coming into the race and took care of his car and got it home safe. So that was my one and my two, just with Max ahead, given everything he did throughout the weekend, putting it on pole, getting it home clean, winning pretty convincingly. Yeah, that's why I gave Max a slight edge. Obviously Lando taking home the championship, he's not too concerned about P2 on personal podium, but that's where I'm
He's
at.
gonna be devastated.
Yeah, that's the way I went, even though Lando's P1 in the season podium.
No one tell Lando we don't want to ruin the rest of his might spoil the rest of his life if we tell him he was P2 on your personal podium in 2025 Abu Dhabi. Uh, in I have Max second, so I mean we touched on him already, so not much else to add there for me. Like you said, I could see an argument for either for those. Uh, in third, I have the big Leclerc, Charles Leclerc. I think he was frisky this weekend. I think he put up a fight there trying to get a podium for Ferrari. And I was just impressed with him this weekend. And I feel like he's had some really good drives this year that didn't make the personal podium. So just kind of wanted to shout him out there as well. Um, Obviously, the other one to think about is Piastri. Not sure if you have him on your personal podium, uh, but I think obviously there's a world you could make that argument as well. But I just went a little bit different. The big Leclerc uh, in a weekend where he's out there driving with Leclerc Jr., his older brother. Just some really impressive stuff from Charles this weekend.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna go with Charles as well.
Oh my
Just
gosh, Oscar!
another. Yeah, well, I think Oscar drove a very good drive, but obviously we talk about Max and Lando did exactly what they needed to do. Oscar really needed to win to have any remote chance, and wasn't able to
Fair.
do that. Still a great weekend. Still would have him in my top five for sure. Um, but Charles really just drove the wheels off the Ferrari to even give it a shot. Was 50 seconds ahead of Lewis. Granted, Lewis, of course, starting uh, much further back, but yeah, I mean, just really phenomenal, and it's been a great effort for him all season. And probably his least competitive season in a while, but obviously that's due to Ferrari and the car this year and everything going on at the team. So, a great way to cap that season off. I think he can hold his head high and take some positives, at least with his personal driving into the offseason, and then see kind of where this Ferrari experiment goes for next year.
Yeah, Hamilton at this point just kind of working a 9 to 5, just clocking in, clocking out, getting through the day, getting to the next one, trying to put food on the table. You know, doesn't really love his job, but he's just out there. He's just got to do it. Gotta get out there.
Yeah, I am impressed that he dug all the way up to P8, though. Coming back from
Yeah,
a really abysmal qualifying, another exit, a Q1 exit, which is really in a rough spot right now.
yeah.
So I am impressed that he kind of dug that out, dug a result out, even when nothing was on the line realistically. But yeah, he's clearly pretty dejected, and I don't blame him for what went on there, Ferrari this year. Hopefully, he can figure it out. Obviously, because with Leclerc beating him pretty convincingly this year, he's got his own issues as far as adjusting to the car and everything. Hopefully, he's in a better place and the team's in a better place next year.
He's going into a full detox, full phone detox. I think this off season. He said he's just getting out into the woods, no phone, just kind of doing what was it Aaron Rodgers did, a silent retreat. Might need one of those just to reset.
Yeah, I was gonna say LeBron used to do the zero dark 30 in the playoffs where he like got off his phone and he like made a big post saying he was getting off social media and it's time to lock in. So I think that's kind of
Oh,
the mode that Lewis is in. I think he just needs a little bit of time away from everything
yeah.
to reset and kind of figure out what his future is going to be after,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how next season goes, I guess.
Yeah, I think a big part of it depends on if Ferrari can give him something decent next year to work with. Um, but yeah, that'll be interesting to see. Hopefully, he comes back better next offseason. And Ferrari don't disappoint me like they did this year with my prediction for them this season. Uh, we'll move to stinker of the week. Last stinker of the week for the 2025 season. Was really tempted to go Alpine here. Bottom two on the grid. But had to go actually a different way, go with Racing Bulls. Luckily, they held on to sixth in the constructors, but not based on anything they did this weekend. I mean, they struggled mightily, finished 17th and 18th in the race. Almost cost them a P6 in the constructors, which is huge for the midfield teams. And yeah, it just wasn't a very good weekend. They got lucky to hold on from Aston Martin, who had a pretty good weekend behind them, and hold on to that P6 in the constructors. I think they only won by about 3 points. So yeah, not a good weekend for them, but they hold on and finish P6. A good season overall, just not a good weekend.
Yeah, I think that's totally valid. The good news for you is that I went with Alpine, even though you didn't. It's just
Hold their feet to the fire. Go
yeah.
off.
No, just a bad end to a bad season. Pretty much
Yeah.
all their Twitter posts reflect that. The last couple days, they post the car and say this car taught us a lot. They say they post pictures of the drivers and say challenging times only make you work harder. It's
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
yeah, exactly. That's kind of where we're at with
Oh.
Alpine this year. Another team that is very glad it's time for the off season. I'm just hoping to give Colapinto as well. I hope gets to be more competitive, but I really hope they give Pierre a good car because he's one of my favorite drivers to watch when he's on and he's competing. He can really pull out some great results if you give him something decent to work with. So I'm hoping they can do that next year. Just even a midfield car again. Not asking for much, but it's been a real disaster, and this was a disaster into a disaster year.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've talked a lot about just loving it when Piastri has a decent car, or when Gasly has a decent car to work with. Just watching him out there, I think he's very underrated. Just because of the car he's been in the last few years. But you see moments here and there when he's able to just outdo what that tractor is allowing him to do. And then Colapinto as well. I'd like to see both of these guys get a good car next year, because he's not afraid of anybody. He's got one of the more interesting attitudes on the grid of just not scared to go up and race anybody, and make moves, get in there, and really kind of ruffle some feathers, which I love when drivers aren't afraid to do that, and we get to see some really good racing out of it. So, maybe they can get a car where I'd love to see him and Colapinto and Lawson have a few battles next year. I know that's not asking for much, Racing Bulls, and we want Alpine to get to the level of Racing Bulls, but yeah, just something where they can be a little bit more competitive would be great.
Yeah, exactly. Just two guys that we love seeing battling up there, and we don't like to see any team so uncompetitive as Alpine has been recently. It
Yeah.
stinks that this has been arguably the most competitive and close the grid has ever been this season. And we see, a team like Alpine. Obviously, there have been worse teams over the course of F1 history. And Gasly did get some points, especially earlier
Yeah.
in the year, but. As the season has gone on, it's gotten more and more dire, and it's just great time for them to get to the off season and to make some changes. Mercedes engine coming in and everything could be great for them.
Yeah, they checked out a while ago, and their beautiful social media team admitted to that as well. We touched on that a couple months back. But yeah, that wraps it up for the 2025 season. We got a lot. We're gonna have some other stuff to talk about. We'll probably do a driver rating, ranking, maybe tier list episode from just the 2025 season. I also like to do kind of a year in review thing where we just go back through all the races, just have little tidbits from each of the races, and nothing too long from each race, but just to where we can, capture a few funny moments, a few good moments from each weekend, and just remember what we got from the 2025 season. So we'll have some more stuff coming in the off season here, but yeah, that's it for 2025. It was a great season. We got a new champion, and a lot to look forward to in 2026 as well. We got our Team Cadillac coming to the grid. Will be the first and foremost podcast to get you guys all caught up on all of your Cadillac stuff. Already seeing Botas posting, getting in the seat, the cockpit of the Cadillac. Just a lot of content already coming out from Cadillac and Botas. So setting up for a great year next year, but it was also a great year this year, and super happy to do it all with you guys and with you, Sam, and just talk about it all throughout the year.
Absolutely. I'm excited to get into the off season. Like you mentioned, we got a lot to talk about from this year and a lot to look forward to next year. Cadillac and Audi joining, Lindblad joining the grid. So many new things going on, new regulations, so much to talk about. And I'm thrilled to do it with you, Josh, and thrilled everyone who's listening. Thank you. And looking forward to doing some more here in the future.
Yeah, I think I want to do tier lists instead of rankings or ratings for the drivers on the grid this year. I just think it'll be a little bit more fun to kind of tier them out instead, and we can go through it together and each give our own tier lists, driver by driver. I think that'll be pretty fun to do this off season, and then year in review stuff as well. It'll be great to look back at all those moments, and we're officially entering the Cadillac era, 2026. It all begins, baby. Might finish P11 in the championship. Hey, doesn't matter. You know what? They're building for the future. It's going to come together. Full believers, blind believers in Cadillac here. But yeah, that's everything for this year.
I'll take it. Cadillac's an American team, so if we have to tank for a draft pick the next year, so be it. We can deal with that for a year.
Yeah, we're tanking for Arch Manning, so we're ready. We're getting everybody we need to in place. Maybe tank for Colton Herta, already a part of the squad, but tank for the young guys. Building for the future, just setting a foundation. Got to get a good offensive line. Got to get a good quarterback. You can build on everything from there. I think that's what we're doing with Cadillac.
Yeah, whichever one of Bottas or Perez scores a single point next year gets to keep their seat.
Whoever scores first gets to keep their seat.
Yeah,
or if
exactly.
you score at all. Yeah. All right. Well, that's everything for this episode. Should probably be doing a rankings episode or tier list episode in the next week or two. So we'll have that out for you guys. Not leaving everyone high and dry in the off season, but definitely slow down a little bit and get ready for 2026. But thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Absolutely. Can't wait.